from Detect 5 and report into command point.
We got a PD here, Tampa 1142.
243 assault on protection team.
Evacuate CD-17 at once. If not, I cannot make
Reward noted. Protection team member. Fabrication reserved.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another project series video. My name is Ron Lee Christianson with Blue Horse Studios, and today we're going to get started on a project for Coope Master and the Consumer Electronics Show coming up the first year. We have the HAF Stacker series case here that we're going to be modding into a Half-Life 3 theme build. So let's not waste any time, let's just jump right in and get started. Alright, looking at the case here guys, we have a 920 or 915 on the bottom here. This is the rear standard power supply version. We have the mid tower, which is the 925. And then on the top here, another 915, which was used as hard drive storage that Lee Harrington and I demoed at PAX. So what I'm doing right now is just doing a little bit of teardown on the case, removing some of the panels that we don't need. What I want to do is go ahead and get out my drill, start busting this case down completely, drill out all the rivets, sand this down, and get it ready for paint. So anytime that I'm doing a teardown on the case, one thing that I like to do, and I make a good habit of, is doing a parts labeling and screw labeling. It's really helpful when you try to put the case back together where you know which screws go where. So I just keep these little plastic bags handy, and then I label each one, set it aside, so that way when it comes to time to reassemble the case, you know exactly where everything is going. Okay, with the screws removed from the drive rails, they just pop right on off. Now we have access to some of the rivets. Now we can start drilling this case apart and get it sanded down. Alright, there's a few rivets here on the top. There's 2 in the back, a couple up front here, and then 4 of them here supporting this bracket as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and start drilling them out. Alright, I got the rear standard 915 pretty much tore down now. Got a couple rivets still here to remove, but it's just going to make it a lot easier when it comes time to paint if you do a complete teardown on your case. What I like to do is take everything down, take the factory finish completely off, take it down to bare metal. That way I know I have a good base for my first base coats and primer. So we've got a couple more rivets to remove, and then we can start sanding this down and maybe apply our first coat of paint in a couple hours. Okay, so we got the 915s completely tore down. This piece here is actually one entire piece of rolled steel, so that doesn't come apart. But when we put this back together, we're going to be using some copper rivets on this. So what I'm going to do right now is just get out my orbital sander and start sanding these panels down. Okay, so just like on the 915s that we just dismantled, on the 925 here, you have the same sliding locking mechanism, these guide rails here that need to be removed before you can get at a couple of the rivets. And we have them both on the top and the bottom. So I'm going to start removing those, and we'll start riveting out some of the panels. Inside December's issue of CPU Magazine, there's a great article and a review on the Coope Master HAF Stacker series. There's also been some great video reviews out there done by Linus Tech Tips, Tech Power Ups, and a few others. And then on the back of the magazine of December's issue is one of the PCs that Lee and I demoed. This was quite a surprise when I received the issue this month. I wasn't expecting to see that on the back of the article. And it's a nice little feature. So this is basically the case that we're breaking down right now. This is the actual case that we're tearing down right now, is the pic that you see here. So what we're doing right now is go in and remove that 240 rad that Lee and I installed, and remove these hard drive cages, tear all this down, and get it ready for paint. Right now we're just going to start removing the 5 1/4 base here. This is held in with a couple screws and some rivets from the back. Okay, with the bottom 5 1/4 bay removed, now I can go ahead and remove the 240 rad. Alright, with those screws removed, the rad will just kind of simply slide out the front here. And this rad is actually from one of the AIOs, the Coope Master I use for the demo. But I'm possibly thinking about reusing this for the build. I'm going to go ahead and drain this out, flush it, and get the rest of the fluid out of it. Okay, with the rad removed, now I can go ahead and remove the top 5 1/4 bay. Alright, on the front here, what we need to do is go ahead and, I don't think I'm going to use a front mounted radiator here, so what I want to do is go ahead and cut this whole entire mounting system out. The easiest way to do that is continue to break down this case until I'm just have the front panel available, and then once I remove that, then I can have easier access with my Dremel, and then we can go ahead and cut this whole piece out. So what I'm going to do is continue breaking down the case. We got a few more rivets to do to remove the top, the front, and the back, and the bottom, and the motherboard tray. Okay, so I removed all the rivets from the top panel, and this piece should just slide off easily, and it does. Now we're just going to go ahead and remove the motherboard tray, the back and front panels. Alright, with those rivets removed, the motherboard tray should just slide right on out. Alright, so the case is almost completely broken down. We just have the rear and front panel to remove. And I'm just going to flip this over to get access to the rivets on the bottom, drill them out, and then remove those panels as well. Or with the front panel removed, it's going to be a lot easier for me to cut this area out now. So I'm just going to mask this off and go ahead and Dremel this all out. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and use a cutting disc, get in this tight area here to cut this area out. Alright, so we just went ahead and cut away the found Manny bracket and the rad bracket there. And this is kind of what we're left with that we're going to reuse. These are the 2 front mounting supports that's going to be riveted back in. What I need to do now is just take this over to my bench sander, sand all these pieces down, make them sure they're all smooth, and file it down, and then get these things ready for paint as well. Alright, I got my pieces laid out here for the 925, and what I'm starting to do right now is go ahead and remove the factory finish. I'm using my orbital sander with some 40 grit paper, and I just want to take this down to bare metal so I have a good foundation for my first primer and paint coats. Okay, I went over the top of the panels with a couple coats of light primer, and once he's dry we'll finish it up with a little bit of wet sanding and start riveting the panels back together. Okay, I started reassembling the case now, and I'm using these copper rivets to secure the panels back together. And then once we finish this up, then I can start laying down my first base coats of color and start thinking about some of the effects panels that we're going to create on this Half-Life build. Okay, I got the 925 pretty much put back together now. I'm just kind of working on the 915s here. And the reassembly process on these cases are very easy. It's one of the easier cases I've ever taken apart and put back together. And like I said before, we're using the copper rivets to secure these back together because we're going to kind of go for an industrial theme with the paint scheme once we finish all this up. Okay, so I moved on to working on the motherboard tray here, and what I have is a 1/8 inch piece of plastic that I'm going to rivet to the side of the motherboard tray. We're going to carve in some panel lines and create some custom lighting in here as well, and then we're going to create a platform right above this that we're going to float our SSDs on. So what I need to do next is go ahead and just start carving in and cutting out my panel lines, create the platform, and then make the mounts for the SSDs, and then we can move on to installing a custom paint job. Alright, so I finished cutting out my panels here, and got the first one cut out, got all my scribe lines cut in. I just used a scriber bit to cut in the first channel, and then just took a small screwdriver to make the bevels in the lines, and then I just went over the top of it with 150 grit paper to sand it all smooth. And then the second piece here, we're just going to mount right over the top like this and kind of just float it above the surface about maybe an inch, inch and a half. And then we'll mount the SSDs in these 2 areas here. And then we cut out these 2 channels here. They're going to go back behind the motherboard tray for our cable management. Okay, I'll be using the Kingston HyperX 120 gigabyte SSDs for this part of the build. And we just finished our little panel here. And what I need to do is go ahead and create these little sleds that are going to slide right onto this panel here. And then our SSDs will mount in that position, just like so. And once we finish that up, we can go ahead and start working on our first coats of primer, and then maybe start thinking about a paint job. Alright, I finished up all the raw construction here on our effects panel. We're also going to run some of our water cooling tubing right down the center of this panel here when it comes time to do that. What I want to do at the moment right now is Go ahead and get this mounted up inside the case. Make sure everything is fitting properly. Do a dry fit. And then we'll pull it back out and we'll install some LEDs behind these panels to illuminate the whole area and give it a nice glow effect. So let's go ahead and get this mounted up inside the case. Okay, so what I've done here is just installed the panel inside the case here momentarily and just dry fitting everything together and making sure it's fitting properly. The next step in the process is working on some of the LEDs that are going to illuminate these panels here. So what I'm going to do is just take everything back out, start working on some LEDs and some effects lighting that are going to go behind these panels here. Okay, I'm going to get started on the sleeving and the wiring for my vandal switches. I have two of them here. I have one with amber center illumination and then one with the white ring illumination. And the vandal switches come with their wires here and they connect by a spade connector into the appropriate fittings into the back, appropriate connections. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut off the spade connectors and make some hard connections with some solder. So I'm heating up my soldering iron, we'll get those attached and then we'll do some sleeving on the wires. And then we'll start working on the front bezel and getting that constructed and then get these installed. Alright, here's the instructions for wiring on the vandal switch. We're using the 16mm here, and we're going to start with wiring the LEDs. The very top of the LED on the vandal is your positive, and the very bottom terminal is your negative, and we're going to solder those 2 points into the connectors right now. Okay, I have the positive and negative side for the LED illumination soldered in. Now I'm just going to apply a little bit of heat shrink over the top of this and then start working on the power connections. Okay, I finished all the wiring on the vandal switches. I got them wired to the motherboard header on this test motherboard, and I'm just going to go ahead and just power this on, make sure everything is working properly. And you can see the ring illumination. We have the white for our reset, and obviously the orange is going to be our power. And once the motherboard goes through its boot sequence, I'm going to go ahead and do a reset and make sure that button is working properly. Alright, let's go ahead and do the reset. And the reset works properly as well. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just go ahead and power all this down, start working on some of the sleeving, and then we can start working on the front bezel. Okay, I have the front bezel here, and what I want to do is just go ahead and kind of create my own custom panel on this. In the first part of the video I cut out the fan mounts and radiator mount because I'm not going to have a front mounted radiator or any fans on the front side of this case. So I cut that area out and we're going to go ahead and create some custom panels to go in place. And I'm starting to work on this piece of 1/8 inch ABS, and that's just going to mount just right over that area there. And then we're going to install our 2 vandal switches in here. I'll still need to go in and create a lot of custom panels to hold all these pieces together and give the panels just some detail and just kind of make everything kind of blend together. So that's what I'm working on right now. Doing a little bit more work here on the front bezel. I went in and just added some panel effects and making these little kind of static latches here just for some panel effect detail. I'm just going in and adding a little bit more detail to these panel lines. And then we're getting pretty close to adding our first coat of primer to this. Okay, I finished the front bezel here, and I just applied a couple coats of some automotive primer, and I just kind of going in and doing a little bit of finish sanding on this. I'll apply a couple more coats in just a little bit. What I want to start working on right now is the panel that's going to go behind the front bezel and attach to the SSD mounts, and it's going to attach just like so. So what I need to do is just go in and start just making all my little custom panels and detail lines, and then adhere the 2 panels together and get installed inside the case. Alright, I'm starting to work on the panel that's going to go behind the front bezel, and I'm just marking out the panel lines, and I'll use my scriber bit to go in and scribe all these lines out, and then use my small little chisel to chisel in the bevel into the panel lines to give it a nice kind of detailed finish like you see here on this panel. So I'm going to go ahead and continue working on that and get it completed, and we can attach the 2 panels together. Now I'm just taking my screwdriver and just going in and adding the bevel to the panel lines just to give it a little bit more detail and depth to it. And it takes a few passes to get this right, and then once we finish with that, we'll just go over with some light sandpaper and clean up the lines, make sure they're perfectly straight. And then we'll start working on some of the other panel details and then finish it off with a primer coat and a paint job. I jumped ahead here a little bit, guys. What we have is the case door here. What I need to do right now is go ahead and drill out some of the areas in here so we can mount our acrylic window inside here temporarily. I'm going to leave this area open down along the bottom here. We're going to have that open, available for venting. I'm going to increase these little grills. They're going to keep continuing across this panel here. And then right over there on the right hand side we have Gordon Freeman's Black Mesa ID badge that's going to be illuminated with a white LED when I connect it to the 12 volt power. But we're getting pretty close to installing first coats of primer. But what I want to do right now is, like I said, is go ahead and drill out those mounting holes for the acrylic window. Okay, I just went ahead and attached the side case door. What I'm doing here is just making sure everything is fitting properly and none of these pieces are making contact with the front part of the bezel, and making sure everything is just sliding back and forth properly. Everything looks pretty good. What I want to do right now is move to the opposite side of the case and work on the back case door. Finish that up, make it kind of match what we're doing here, and then I can get started on the two 915s. The top one is going to be for our rad box and the bottom one for our hard drive storage. So let's go ahead and get started on the back case door. Okay, I'm starting working on the side panel here, and I got some 1/8 inch ABS plastic, and then we're going to adhere it to the side panel and create this whole industrial look to kind of simulate the Half-Life look. What I want to do right now is go ahead and take these panels here, start creating some custom rivets inside these panels, some panel lines. We'll create some steam lines. Finish it off with some LEDs and a few other things, and we'll do a paint finish over the top of that once it's all done. Okay, I got the back panel here, and I started laying down some effects panels using some 1/8 inch polystyrene. I just want to build up off of these areas here and create some conduit lines and some steam lines. We're going to build some power module boxes in these areas here, maybe with some LEDs. Kind of just go for that whole Half-Life 3 industrial look. And so what I'm going to do is just start cutting out some panels, start getting them applied, and then once we finish that up, we can install our first coats of primer. Alright, what I'm doing right now is just creating some effects panels to go across the case door here, and I'm using a 1/8 inch polystyrene for this part of the build. And we'll secure this down with some epoxy once we get these complete. What I want to do right now is go ahead and sand these down, create some of the these faux rivet marks that I'm using here in this part of the build, and create these into the panels. Sand them down, create a little bevel on the edges here, and then get them installed. And then once we finish up with that, we can start working up in here in some of these areas. So we're going to create like a power module box with some conduit lines, some LEDs, and just a few other things. So let's go ahead and finish this part of the building. Alright, what I want to do right now is just go ahead and sand around the edges of the polystyrene and just create a bevel, and it just gives a nice complete finished look to it. And then we'll go in and we'll do all the little custom rivets inside here. Alright, I got some of my pieces cut out, and I got my panel lines all scribed in. What I'm going to do right now, I already have the areas marked out for where I'm going to go ahead and use my countersink bit to create these custom rivets. So I'm going to take these pieces over to my drill press and drill in all these little custom rivets that I have pre-marked. Alright, I have the depth set on my drill press. Now I'm going to go ahead and apply the rivet holes. Alright, and that's kind of what we're left with. And now I'll just do a little bit of finish sanding and clean that up and then install it to the case. Alright, I got my pieces finished up. Now I'm going to start adhering them to the panel. And there's several ways that you can adhere your pieces to the panel. What I like to do is use quick set and epoxy. I've also used JB Weld. They make two types. They have one for steel. I believe they also have one for wood, and then also a brand for plastic as well. And you can also, if you wanted to, use a Loctite or any type of CA glue, but the thing about the super glue or any CA glue is that it becomes brittle over time, so I don't recommend any of this for your structural foundation. I always use super glue for the novelty pieces. And then you have your weld-on solvent glue, which is actually a welding solvent. It actually adheres the polystyrene and the ABS together. What I'm going to do is go ahead and go with the epoxy setting. This is what I like to use on all the structural pieces. We're going to mix some of this up, apply it to the panels, and go ahead and attach it to the case door. Okay, I installed these little static latches here, and what I want to work on right now is start working on that conduit box that's going to go through here, and we're going to have some steam lines and conduit lines wrap into it, and we'll install some LEDs inside there as well. So what I need to do is start cutting out the panels, start building up the structure supports in this area, and then get it all attached together. Okay, I'm continuing to do some work across the panel here. I went and added these little vent fins, the latches, and I'm working on these little power modules right now. I went and installed a couple LEDs, and what I need to do right now, before I adhere this to the panel, is solder these lines in, drill a hole through the back panel, and feed the lines down through where we're going to mount it to our power supply. And then this piece is just going to mount just right on the side panel, and we're going to have a couple hoses attaching each power module. Okay, I went ahead and soldered the lines together and used a little bit of heat shrink and cable sleeving to dress up the lines. This whole part is not even going to be seen when we adhere it to the panel. These lines are going to come back through the back of the case and then down into where our power supply is, so we can hook it up to our power supply, and I'll attach a Molex pin to the end of these lines here. So let's go ahead and get this adhered to the side of the panel. Alright, we just went ahead and finished up the side panel. I applied a couple coats of primer and did a little bit of light sanding and attached it to the side of the case. What we need to start working on right now is the top rad box, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, I'm starting to do some work on the 915 now. This is going to be our rad box. I did some assembly on the side of the case. I went in and did a little bit of the paneling detail. We still got quite a bit more that we need to do on here. We still need to create the latches, some of the fan covers. And then right now what I'm working on is the top of the 915. We're going to mount our reservoir right on top with the fan controller and the pump and everything. We're kind of going to go for this whole industrial look. And I'm trying to simulate the gravity gun from the Half-Life build with the reservoir as its core reactor. Alright, I started constructing these panels here. I'm using a little bit of the polystyrene and ABS for support. And what these are going to be mounted on top of is the 915, and our reservoir is going to slide right inside these. And I'm going to kind of simulate the look of the Citadel in the Half-Life games. And we'll finish this off with a little bit more paneling detail, some rivets, and then of course a paint job. Alright, I'm finishing up all the raw construction here on the res tower. And I went in with all these little pearl rivets and made it all these little custom rivets here. What we're going to do now is do a little bit of light sanding, a little bit of putty work, and then go ahead and add a first coat of primer. Alright, I made this custom door to just go right back over the back door of the control panel area. This is going to be the area for our fan controller and our temp sensor. And I already drilled out the lines for power to go down into the rad box. So what I need to do now is go ahead and finish up a little bit more of my sanding and putty work, and then we'll install our first coats of primer. Alright, I just finished this off with a couple coats of primer, and I noticed there's a couple gaps in here that still need some putty, so I'm going to go ahead and finish that off, and then we can get started on the front panel. Alright, I just went ahead and installed the reservoir temporarily. I just want to make sure everything is fitting properly inside the housing here. And everything seems to be fitting great, so I'm just going to go ahead and take this apart, finish doing some of the wet sanding on this piece here, finish up the putty work on the reservoir mount, and get these two pieces attached, and then start thinking about a paint job. Alright, I have the front bezel here on the one of the 915s that we're going to use for our rad box, and I'm using a piece of 1/8 inch ABS plastic, and we're going to epoxy this to the front here, and we're going to create all the panel effects, kind of like what we did on the 925. So what I need to do right now is go ahead and start scribing out these lines, create all my little faux rivets, and then we can start building up some of the panel effects, and then add a paint finish, or excuse me, first primer coats over the top of this surface here. Alright, with my lines already marked out, what I'm going to do is just use my scriber bit and go ahead and just scribe all these lines in. And then I'll take my small little screwdriver and then just kind of just bevel in those lines to give them a nice kind of beveled finish. So let's go ahead and get started on that. I usually make probably about 4 or 5 passes with the scriber bit. And then I go in with the chisel or the small little screwdriver, and it works as a chisel. Kind of cut in the bevel into the ABS to give it a nice finish. And once those lines are kind of defined there, I can just take my my small little screwdriver, that acts as a small chisel, and just kind of carve out a bevel in that plastic. It gives it a really nice finish to it. And then once we finish with that, then I go right over the top of this with some 150 grit paper and just finish it off with a couple coats of primer, and then it's ready for paint. Alright, so I went ahead and added all the little rivet holes, did a little bit of light sanding over the top of the panel, and I went in and I cut out the mesh grill here, and we're going to go ahead and adhere the 2 panels together, and I'm going to use some quick setting epoxy to do so. And once we get done with that, we can start adding a little bit more panel effects, and then spray this over with a couple coats of primer and set it aside and get ready for paint. Right now I'm working on these little latches. I'm just going to adhere them to the side of the panel. I just need to go ahead and cut that angle down and then attach it with a little bit of solvent glue. Alright, I scored the polystyrene, that way I could bend it a little bit, and I'm just going to use a little bit of the welding solvent. This actually welds the plastic together. It doesn't glue it, it welds it together. And just apply it into the position that I want, and it dries within seconds. And dries clear, very thin, and just requires just a little bit of sanding just to clean up those edges. Now we can go ahead and make the little custom bolts that are going to go right over the top of those 4 mounts. Alright, I started work on the front bezel here, and we're working on these custom latches right now. I cut these pieces of ABS down to 1 inch by 1.5 inches, and we're going to start working on the mounts that are going to attach to the side doors of the 950. Alright, I'm filing the edges down on these little latches that I'm making. That way they make a nice connection when I start making the pieces that go to the side. They have a nice bevel to the edge, and there's no gap in the seam there. So that's what I'm working on right now, and then we'll start creating these the panels, the 4 panels that will attach to the sides of the 915. Alright, I finished these little custom latches that go on the top of the 915 on the front bezel. Now I'm starting to work on the ones that go onto the side on the case doors that will come in on the sides. These are just static latches. These won't actually function. They're just more for aesthetics and looks to kind of go with the whole Half-Life theme that we're doing here. But I just need to construct 4 more of these, create the little latch panels that go on there, and then we can start thinking about our first coats of primer. Okay, I have my panels laid out here. Obviously this is our motherboard tray. This is going to be one of the inner side panels that's going to mount for our SSDs, and then this is the front bezel panel, and then we have our top piece here where our reservoir is going to mount inside. And I'm going to start spraying these with a mixture of the gunmetal and metallic gray, just to get some base coats and some aging on these. So let's go ahead and start laying down some base coats. Alright, I'm just starting to lay down my first base coats here. I got a mixture of the gunmetal and a little bit of the smoke black, and I'm just kind of going in and shadowing in the areas that I want some deep detailing in. And we're going to work across all the panels here, and then once we get those finished, we can actually install these back into the chassis, and then we can start working on the case doors and maybe start installing some of the components of the PC. So I'm just going to continue working across these panels, get these base coats applied. That way we can move on to our detail coats and our special effects finish. Okay, I finished off most of the shadow layers here on these panels. Again, it's just a mixture of the smoke black and a little bit of the gunmetal mixed together, and then I just did a 50-50 mixture of the smoke black, and then went into all these little detail lines and kind of just deepened the shadows. Now what I'm doing is just taking a straight mixture of the gunmetal, going right back over those shadows just to push them right back in the back. Alright, I'm just doing a little bit of shading here on the case door, and I'm just going in with a little bit of detail black over reduced, and just getting down in these Down in all these little crevices, kind of just creating some deeper shadows, maybe some area of kind of oil and dust buildup, and getting pretty close to finishing up our base coats here, and then we can move on to adding some other colors. Okay, I moved on to working on the front bezels here and fan grills, or excuse me, the doors for the fan grills on the 915. And what I'm doing is just laying down the base coats of gunmetal, a little smoked black. Now we're going to mix up some color and start fogging in some of the hazard orange, a little bit of white, and start detailing these panels up a little bit. Alright, I'm starting to lay down some of my my graphic templates here. I'm using some fine line tape and some vinyl letters. I don't know if you can pick that up through the camera, but that spells Black Mesa. And we're just working across the panels, doing some masking for the effects panels. I'm going to mix up some color, go right back over the top of this with a caution orange, and then we can peel up some of the graphics to reveal the final effect on those panels. Okay, now I'm just starting to lay down some graphics colors. I lay down the caution orange on the rad box case door there, and then I'm just fogging in some a little bit of the detail white, and we're going to start creating some graphics here on the front bezel. Alright, I just started laying down a little bit more base coat here. Started fogging in and detailing some of the caution orange. I got the radiation logo being airbrushed in here right now, and I'm just kind of laying down some base coats, just defining some colors, some blocks of color, and then we'll go in and age up the panels with some weathering effects. But we're just continuing to move across these panels, installing our base coats and some of our graphics. Alright, I'm going to start to mount my acrylic windows. I got the clear one mounted already, and I have the amber one here. We also went in and sprayed a small graphic, radiation graphic down there on the bottom. And I'm going to use my M3 screws with the matching nuts to secure these panels together. Alright, looking behind the front panel here, you can see the two different colors of acrylic. We have the clear, obviously, and the amber below. And we're starting to mount them here. I still need to add the washers and nuts to the bottom acrylic panel. But what I want to start working on right now is sleeving up the cables for the front panel illumination for Gordon Freeman's ID badge. And we're going to use Lutro's Teleo sleeving for this that he supplied for this project. So we're going to go ahead and sleeve this up, add a couple spade connectors to the end, and finish up this part of the build. Okay, in this area we're going to install Gordon Freeman's ID badge, and we have an LED mounted right up underneath this panel here. It's all wired in. I just need to go ahead and sleeve it up and add a Molex pin to it so we can hook it to our power source. Okay, the LED is all wired up and illuminated, and like I said before, Gordon's ID badge will just be mounted in this position here. And that's pretty much how that effect will work out. So I need to do a little bit more wiring and sleeving. I got some LEDs on the back panel that I need to sleeve up and wire, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to that. Alright, now I just went in and did all the wiring and sleeving to illuminate these two LEDs. So pretty much all our special effects lighting is hooked up, wired up, connected to the proper connections. Now what we can do is start thinking about building the system, get the motherboard installed, start running our lines for wire or for tubing, get the pump installed, basically just start building the system now. We pretty much finishing up all the special effects panels, maybe a couple airbrushing things that we still need to finish up. We still need to go in and detail some of these rivets, add some rust marks to them, scratch up the panels, do a little bit of weathering, a little bit more weathering on the panels. But we're getting pretty close to finishing this up and installing the system. Alright, I'm going to start to do some work on my fan controller. This is just a switch fan controller. It controls 6 fans. And what I want to do is start taking this apart. I've already removed some of the screws. And then the back control panel of this just kind of slides out. And what I want to do with this is go ahead and remove the socket head screws, sand down this factory finish here, and then apply my own paint effects. So that's the point we're at right now. So we're going to take these socket head screws off, sand the surface down, and then we're going to kind of go for like a whole industrial kind of hazard line look on this. Maybe do some font airbrushing on there. This is system flow control or valve control. Alright, I'm doing a little bit of work on the front panel on the fan controller. I just sprayed this over with a hazard orange and then just went in with my fine line tape to create the hazard lines, and then with my vinyl letters I just went in and created the system flow valve. Now what I need to do is just spray back over the top of this with a base coat of the flat gray and gunmetal and start aging this up. Alright, I finished up the plate on the fan controller, and that's just going to go right over the top of the switches there. We got the doors attached. We still got a lot of airbrushing to do. I need to go and fix a lot of the overspray that I had, do all the detailing, some of the weathering. Yeah, so we're getting pretty close to completing the rad box, and we're going to install the radiators, the fans, and start installing the system here pretty shortly. Alright guys, what I've done is just went ahead and taken our power supply apart, and we're using the Silent Pro hybrid 1300 watt power supply by Coope. And what I've done is just taken it apart, did a light buff over the top of this, a little light sanding, taken the fan out. We're going to do some sleeving on the cables, but what I'm working on right now is doing the rust effect on top of the fan blades. What I've done is just use a little bit of our iron metallic surfacer, just painted that right over the top of the blades, and then once that had dried, I just went ahead and used the rust antiquing solution, sprayed it right over the top of the blades, and just put it in the sandwich baggie, and we're just going to let this set up for about 10 to 12 hours. But what I want to move on to right now is go ahead and start working on some of the graphics here. What I've done is use a little bit of my contact paper, my masking paper for stencils. I printed out the Black Mesa logo. We're going to cut this out with an X-Acto blade. We're going to lay this right over the top and start laying down our paint graphics. And then I have another one, radioactive one as well. So let's go ahead and start working on the first layers of color here and get the power supply finished up. Alright guys, what I've done here is I just went ahead and sprayed over the top of this with a little bit of sun yellow and then a little bit of the caution yellow. This is going to be our base color, and what I did next was went ahead and used some of my vinyl letters, and I went ahead and spelled out the caution radioactive, and then down here the Black Mesa and Research Facility. And what we're going to do is go ahead and spray this back over with some detail black, and then once that's dry we'll peel away the letters, and we'll peel away the paint mask here of the graphics, revealing the final effect. And we'll go in and do some weathering and some detailing once all that's complete as well. Okay, so we moved on to working on some of the sleeving, and the product here is the Telio sleeving supplied by Lutro Customs. And he sent us out the black, the gray, and the carbon gray. And we went ahead and sleeved up our lines already for the 24 pin. And you can see how the product looks over the top of the 16 gauge wire there. It's just an absolutely beautiful product. And the method that we're going to use for the sleeving is the heat shrinkless method, where you put the heat shrink over the end like we did on this one here, and then you melt it down and you cut it away to where you have a perfect little cap like on that one there, and it just slides into the connector and leaves just such a beautiful professional finish. Mike goes into great detail about this method, and I'm going to put a link in the description to some of his videos. And what we're going to do now is just go ahead and finish pinning out the 24, finish up the sleeving, do the 8 pin, a couple of the PCIs, a couple of the SATAs, and then we're going to move on to a few other things on this project. Okay, I'm just going to show you guys really quick how we do the heat shrinkless method here. And like I said before, I'm going to put a link in the description to Mike's videos, the full detail, the tools you're going to need, the length to cut your wires and all that, and he goes into great detail about that. But what you want to do is you want to have the sleeving halfway in between those two connectors, so when it bites down onto that end when we melt it down, when you pull back on the sleeving, if you have any tug on it, it's not going to release from that connector. So what we're going to do is just put a little bit of heat shrink right over the end there. Always like to leave a little bit of heat shrink kind of just poking out the end. Just going to give it a little bit of flame, melt it down, And then you just take your finger just to cap this off. And you might need to do this a couple times to get it melted down. But with this Teleo sleeving, it seems to work a lot better than the sleeving that I've used in the past. But it just melts down really quick and makes a nice, perfect little cap. So the next step is you just go ahead and just cut that away. Cut the heat shrink away, and leaves you with a nice little melted cap. And you can pull on that wire as hard as you want, and it's not going to release from that end there. And then that end just slides obviously into the end of the connector, and you have a heat shrinkless sleeving method. It just makes a really professional finish. Alright, I just finished sleeving up the power supply. Now we're going to go ahead and get the CPU installed into the motherboard and get the motherboard mounted inside the chassis. ASUS has sponsored us with the Z87 Sabertooth, and we're going to be using the Intel Core i7 4770K processor. We're going to use the Coolant's 380 block for cooling. What I want to do right now is just go ahead and get the CPU installed and mount the CPU block. Okay, we're going to be using the Coolant's 380 CPU block, and since my water is going to be coming down the right hand side of the motherboard, I'm going to mount the CPU block in this position where my water comes in, comes out, and flows down to the GPU. Right now I'll just work from corner to corner here and get the CPU block tightened down. Alright, I went ahead and mounted the motherboard, installed the power supply, and mounted the SSDs. Now what we're going to get to working on is installing the radiators in the top 915, start running our lines for tubing, finish up a little bit more airbrushing, and we're getting pretty close to finishing up this project. Alright guys, what we have here is 10 of the JetFlow 120s by Master, and what we're going to do, we're just going to do a simple fan mod on these. We're going to sleeve up the cables, we're going to paint the housing titanium silver and do a rust effect on the fan blades itself. Alright guys, here's the JetFlow 120. This is the white LED fans. What we're going to need to do is go ahead and start prepping these for paint. What I need to do is go ahead and remove the sticker here, the one in the back, and then hopefully we can try to get the fan blade out of here. There's a locking pin or a rivet in the back that makes it very difficult for the fan blade to come out, but I'm going to try my best to get it out of there. If we can't, then we'll just go ahead and spray over the entire thing. I'm not too concerned about any of the sleeving, getting some overspray, because all this is going to be re-sleeved anyways. We're just going to do a nice rust effect on this, and then we'll just finish it up with some aging and weathering effect as well. So let's go ahead and start removing some of these stickers, get all this stuff removed, all the housing brackets, and start applying our first coats of paint. Alright, now I'm starting to mount my JetFlow 120s to the Coolant's radiator. Heath Coope from Tech by Design supplied me with these awesome polished screw packs. I'm going to use the radiator screws to go ahead and mount the fans to the radiator, get the radiators installed, and start running my lines for cooling. We're going to get started installing our water blocks onto our GTX 780 video cards here. And we have two of them. We have two water blocks, and then we also have the connect bridge for the SLI connection as well. So let's go ahead and get these unboxed, and we'll start taking the video card apart and get the water block installed. Okay, I went ahead and mounted my two video cards, and my video connecting blocks that I have for this build are the wrong size. What I need is a little bit longer connecting block that allows for the configuration that has an empty slot in between the two cards. These ones are just a little bit too short, so we're going to return these to Coolant's tomorrow and get the right size. But in the meantime, what we can do, we can start working on our rigid tubing. We can start running our lines. I can still use this as a template to where my out port is going to be, and run the line back to the return to the reservoir. So that's what we're going to get started on now. Alright, I got a couple different flow meters here. They're both by Primal Chill, and we're going to install these into the case. One inside the case on the return, and then one on the inlet. This one's probably going to be attached right as it comes out of the reservoir on the top of the chassis, and this one's probably going to be on the inside back to the return to the reservoir. We also have another faceplate here where we can change this one out to amber if we choose to as well. But I think I'm going to keep this one clear. I kind of like the look of that. And then we also have another spinner, a clear spinner as well. So those are products that were provided by Primal Chill. I want to thank them for stepping up and sponsoring the project. Okay, we have some products provided by Primal Chill here. And we have some rigid tubing, and we have the appropriate fittings to go along with that rigid tubing. And I want to thank David and Brian from Primal Chill for stepping up and sponsoring our project with all these awesome products. They also provided us with those flow meters that I just showed you. But we're going to probably wait until we get our project back from the Consumer Electronics Show before we try to attempt to install the rigid tubing. This stuff doesn't tend to hold up in shipping very well. It cracks very easily. So we're going to probably give this a shot and shoot for getting this done for PDX LAN coming up at the end of February. So I just want to thank again Primal Chill and David and Brian for sponsoring us and helping us out with all these great products. Alright, now we're going to get started bending some acrylic tube. This is a process that takes a little bit of patience and some practice. But what you want to do is take your tube, insert your silicone. What this acts as is when you bend the tube, it keeps the form of the tube without it flattening out. And I'll show you what I mean when I start heating this up here in a second. And let's go ahead and fire up our heat gun. And this takes some time to get this to where it's almost molten. You don't want to hold this too close to the heat gun, because what can happen is you can start blistering the acrylic tube, and if you do that, then the tube is worthless, becomes very frail, and it'll end up cracking on you very easily. So you just want to get it to where you can start applying some pressure to it and adding a bend. There's quite a few tutorials out there on the web that can show you how to do this. You can also purchase the bending manuals. Create your 45 in the 90s, but today I'm just doing this by eye, and it's getting pretty hot there, and then you can just start bending your angle. Alright, we're just doing our leak test now, and I've gone through all the connections and everything seems to be pretty dry, but we're going to leave this on the bench for the next 6 to 10 hours, just to make sure everything is running properly. Alright, we're getting pretty close to finishing up this project now, guys. We're probably on about 4 hours of the leak test, and everything looks to be pretty good. We're going to still let this run for another few hours, but we're getting pretty close to finishing this up. I have some airbrushing things I still need to finish, and then once that is all done, we'll go ahead and start hooking up all the power to our components here, and get into the BIOS, do some tweaks in the BIOS, and install Windows.